I'm joined today by Carl Gallups. He is author of The Magic Man in the Sky, Effectively Defending the Christian Faith, also author of The Rabbi Who Found Messiah, the story of Yitzhak Kaduri and his prophecies of the Endtime. Okay, Carl, I've been researching you all morning. I have so many different things to ask about, and I don't even know really kind of how to break into what to talk about. So I guess first, maybe we'll start broadly speaking. What is your theory about the so-called coming of the Messiah and the end times, as they may be?
Well, you want to know my theory or the story that the book puts forth?
This is all about what you believe. If
Okay.
what you believe is informed by a particular text, by all means, tell us about it.
Well, what I believe is informed by the book that I've written, The Rabbi Who Found Messiah. But of course, I am a Christian unapologetically. I come from a biblical worldview, including the documents of the Old and the New Testament, of course. So my belief is that Messiah has already come, presented himself in the flesh, in the person of Jesus Christ. In Hebrew, that would be Yeshua, Yehoshua. And he fulfilled the dozens of distinct Old Testament prophecies. And his promise is, after going to the cross and rising from the dead, that he will come again. So my ultimate eschatology revolves around the promise and the hope that the Lord Jesus Christ will soon return to set up his kingdom on the face of the earth, according to the teachings of the New Testament and the Word of God.
Okay, good. This is a good framework to start with. So when you say soon, this soon is an interesting term to me.
Yeah.
What do you mean by soon?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting term to me as well. Now, first, I want your audience to know I'm a 30-year pastor, 27 years pastoring in a particular church, a Baptist church on the Gulf Coast. I'm very contextual, very solid, very conservative. I'm not a date setter. I never have been. My book doesn't set dates. In fact, the story of the book doesn't set dates. But when I say soon, here's what I mean. Again, coming from a biblical worldview, David, when I say soon, look, the Bible, the Old Testament, let's talk about the Old Testament. The Old Testament proclaimed that in the last days, and that word last days means the days just before the coming of the Lord, that Israel would revive and would return to the land. Well, David, in 1948, that happened. For the first time in 2,500 years, and the only nation in the history of the world to ever do so, the nation of Israel is revived. It's restored. It comes back to the land. And it is the centerpiece focus of the evening news now, the centerpiece focus of what's going on in the Middle East now. The Bible said that's a definitive sign that we're living in the last days. The clock kind of starts ticking. But it's further than that. You go to Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, and this is striking. It actually names a coalition of nations in the last days that will rise up. They will join together to attack a restored Israel. And those nations are named in their old Genesis 10 table of nations tribal names, but the nations are named and they correspond to the modern day nations of Iran and Russia and Turkey and Egypt and Libya and Syria and Jordan and Lebanon and Saudi Arabia.
All right, so let's pause there for a second. So I find this interesting. You know, I grew up a Jewish but very, very secular, okay? And my position on the state of Israel, which I've talked about on my program, and it's not really the topic today, has been completely based in a secular and geopolitical, so to speak, understanding and not religious. I've always actually found it a little bit forced when I talk to Christians whose support for Israel, in part, is based on the idea that it's a sign that soon Jesus will return, it will be the second coming. But so you're saying that your belief in that is at least in part based in the sacred texts which you believe. My broad question to you then, Carl, is why have you decided that those sacred texts are valid or trustworthy? In other words, what evidence do you have that those texts are to be believed for what you believe them to be?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, listen, I've written volumes to that, and I've spoken volumes to that. I mean, we could do 2-hour show on that, but just a very quick answer to your huge question, because the Old Testament documents and the New Testament documents are some of the most reliable of any of the ancient manuscripts known to man to this day. They've been more scrutinized, more heavily scrutinized, probably than any documents known to man.
But define reliability. I think this is key.
Let me answer your question. let me answer your question. So the bottom line is, you've got dozens and dozens of prophecies, for example, in the Old Testament, that point to with specificity to a singular person who will come, who will appear, literally, who will be crucified, who will rise from the dead, who will heal the blind, heal the sick, raise the dead, all of these different things, born in Bethlehem. I mean, I could go through the dozens of prophecies, and out of the billions of people alive today, out of the billions of people who have ever lived, there is only one single solitary life that fulfills those prophecies. And by the way, those prophecies spoke of when he came, when this one came, he would come. Malachi, the book of the Old Testament, ends with this: and he will suddenly come to his temple, the Lord whom you are seeking, the Messiah, and who can stand in his presence?
Yeah, but Carl, I have to put a pause on this, because just knowing what my audience is most interested in and what will resonate most with them, I want to attempt to reframe the question in a way that maybe will get us to either an answer or a non-answer that might be enlightening.
Okay, well, I'm answering your first question, but if you're looking for something else, please ask.
Yeah, let me reframe it. What evidence do you have that is not the sacred texts themselves, that the sacred texts are to be trusted literally?
I don't understand your question. I mean,
in other words, let me try one more reframing, and then it may just be a question we're not going to get an answer to. But I'm trying to really frame it in the best way. You believe the sacred text to be literally accurate, as you have talked about on this program. Do you have anything other than the sacred texts themselves to point to prove that accuracy, that Jesus was born to a virgin, the second coming, everything? You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, and I have to start with the sacred text, but then I'll jump outside of them as you've asked me to do.
Okay.
Because these texts speak of things, prophetic things that were to come, not just the coming of the Christ, which, by the way, we have all manner of documents outside of what I'm going to call the Bible, the sacred text, that attest to the historical figure of Jesus Christ, his crucifixion, the claimed resurrection, etc.
But we have to pause there. I like that you're going to focus on the part outside of the Bible. But there is absolutely no historical record that Jesus came back to life. Those who try to claim that there is are just wrong.
Okay. Well, David, you asked me a question, but before I can answer it, you want to go into an argument. And I understand you probably have an agenda here. I'm just simply trying to answer your question. And if you would allow me to finish, I would appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, so to finish answering your questions, yes, there is evidence that people were claiming the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But there is evidence of that outside the Scriptures, and we have the evidence of the martyrs and the people who were close to Christ, who went to their death proclaiming. They were as sure of his death and resurrection as they were sure of their own life, and those are all historically recorded. But let me deal with something else. We also have, way back in Deuteronomy, one of the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, we have way back in Deuteronomy, Moses proclaiming that before and of course, he didn't even go into the promised land. He died before they went in. But he proclaimed in a prophetic vision that not only would Israel go into the land, but they would conquer the land, they would become a mighty nation, but in the future days, long time in the future. Now listen, I'm going to jump outside the Scriptures in a moment, but you got to hear this.
Yep.
Way back in Deuteronomy, Moses said that they would come to the land, they would become a mighty nation, but they would eventually go into captivity and they would be scattered to the nations. David, this is in Deuteronomy.
But I think you're proving my point, though. But Carl, we have to have a conversation. We have to have a conversation here, and I want to point to
we're not having a conversation.
But a conversation is not uninterrupted sequences. What I want to point out is, you're pointing
when you ask
to
a question, it should be uninterrupted till I answer it.
You're pointing to Deuteronomy, which is part of those sacred texts.
But I promised you, if you would allow me, I would step outside the text, and I told you that I was going to begin there. But you won't let me. No question that you've asked me thus far have you allowed me to finish the answer.
But Carl, as you understand as a radio host, I can see that with the circumventions, we're not going to get to an answer.
Yes, if you would let me answer, we will.
Okay, let's get to the answer.
Thank you. I think you'll be surprised if you'll let me answer the question.
Okay.
So, as I promised you, I'm beginning with the sacred text but I'm going to jump outside, as you asked me, because it's only, if you're going to judge the sacred text, then you have to begin there. That's only fair. And then we jump outside to answer your question. So back in Deuteronomy, Moses said that this would happen, but then he also said, not only will you be scattered to the nations, but it also says in the last days, God will bring you back and restore you as a nation. Now listen to this, Deuteronomy 4, and I'm going to paraphrase this quote, but I've got it written in my first book, The Magic Man in the Sky, and effectively defending the Christian faith. But he says in Deuteronomy 4, God says, Moses quotes the Lord. He says, has any other God ever done such a thing? Has any other God ever taken one nation out of another nation and made them a mighty nation? And then listen to what he says. And I have done these things, I have shown you these things, so that you might know that I am the Lord. Now, so that was God's proof of his own existence, not only that he would take this nation and make them into a mighty nation, but that he would scatter them to the ends of the earth, and then in the last days, and the inference is thousands of years later, he would bring them back to the land and reestablish them. So, David, my answer to your question is, we watch the evidence of the sacred text. We watch the proof of God's very existence on the news every night, every day, for years and years and years. And now in the center focus of evening news is this proof centered in the sacred text written 3,000 years ago, David, yet being lived out only in our lifetime, the only generation in human history to see the nation of Israel come back to the land just as the Bible prophesied. So you asked me, is there proof outside the sacred text that the sacred texts are accurate? Yes, there is. And we watch it on the evening news.
Unfortunately, my question was not answered. I didn't ask whether things that are in the sacred texts have been after the fact pointed to be true. My question was, what evidence do we have outside of the sacred texts that the sacred texts are even the word of God? In other words, wars have been predicted for a very long time within and outside of religious texts. Conflict and the rise and fall of nations has been predicted. Yes. My question was a different one. Unfortunately, though, Carl, we're just out of time. We're just out of time.
It was an illogical question. You asked
me. You find it illogical because there's no such proof.
Text, and that's illogical. So Carl, listen, I've been doing radio for 20 years, and I know how all this works, and I can see your agenda. But
it's not an agenda. I am a search. If we are to actually explore evidence from a scientific perspective, you've presented none. You've cited Deuteronomy as proof of a later book. Listen, like Carl, I'm sorry. I know because you know that radio.
Of time. Of course,
Carl. We agreed to 10 minutes. We've done 13. You're welcome back literally anytime. I am not trying to shut down the conversation. I have a long list of other topics. I want to talk about your birtherism and so many other things. We are just out of time, and I do apologize, but you're welcome back anytime, and as proof that I am not simply trying to stifle debate over this.
Well, I think that this interview speaks for itself, that you did stifle it. You asked me illogical questions. I tried to answer them, and you wouldn't let me finish. And then when I did, you said it wasn't the right answer.
Calling the question illogical is very, very different than saying you don't have an answer. They're two different things, but I think the audience will judge whether the question was illogical or whether the answer was.
Yes, I trust that the audience will judge. Thank you so much, David.
Carl Gallups, check out his books, and he's welcome back anytime. Like I said, we are open to the debate.